All right. So economics 10B is the macroeconomics element of the subject of economics. We understand that economics is a broader subject, and it encompasses many aspects in relation to what it takes into consideration. There is microeconomics, then there is macroeconomics. With microeconomics, we'll be dealing with the individual elements within the economy. So we'll be looking at individual demand, we'll be looking at individual supply, we'll be looking at the behavior of households in terms of how they would want to purchase a particular product, the behavior of firms in terms of how they would want to supply a particular product, the behavior of markets, individual markets, individual market structures. So in macroeconomics, we do not look at the individual perspective of the subject of economics, but we look at it at a broader level, which we refer to as a macro level. This is a view where we are looking at things in an aggregated format. So when we're now talking about demand, we are now talking about aggregate demand. When we're now talking about supply, we'll be talking about aggregate supply. So when you try to encompass some of these elements, you'd find out that we'll be aggregating all of these elements. All right, so what you have on your screen is a circular flow of income and spending. I would want to use it as a starting point of the explanations that we're going to be using. So if I become inaudible in parts of the presentation, please highlight so that I know that I'm communicating effectively. I hope my screen is also visible. Right, so what you have on your screen is a circular flow of income and spending, which highlights the participants within an economy as well as the markets that then get formed within that particular economy. So this is a starting point for you to understand at a broader level the subject of economics. So an economy is a system of interdependent participants. So these are participants that depend on each other in order to fulfill the needs and wants that accrue to different from different perspectives of different participants. So we have two main participants, which are the households, which are basically made up of the individuals within a market or within a nation, whatever it might be. And these households are said to be the owners of factors of production. So the households, they own what we refer to as factors of production. And by factors of production, we're talking about elements that are used to produce like labor. We're looking at elements like capital, natural resources, as well as the enterprising skills. So these are the four main factors of production. So these are the four main factors of production that would be in existence within a particular households on the factors of production, which in order for them to produce. So firms are basically entities which are profit driven. These are entities that try to produce what the households require, and in turn, they would want to make sure that they are maximizing profits. So you can see that in terms of the objectives of the firms, the objectives of the firms is to maximize profits, and the objectives of the households is to satisfy their needs and wants, the various needs and wants that they have. So the firms would try to come in by solving the problems on behalf of the households, delivering the various goods and services that are required through enterprising to the households, and then the households would be buying these goods and services in different markets that then gets formed as a result of that. So you'd find out that for firms, they need the factors of production in order for them to produce, and the households would need the goods and services that are being produced by the firm. So you'd find out that it's a system of interdependence. So for a system of interdependence to operate effectively, you would find out that there is need for a pricing mechanism or an exchange mechanism in order for them to exchange value for value. The households would be offering the factors of productions to the firms, and they would want to accrue a certain value, which depending on the factor of production in question, either land, labor, capital, natural resources, etc., you'd find that remunerated in a diversity of remuneration, which we refer to as income, which can be wages, interest, rent, profits, depending with what the households are offering to the firms. So the firms, as they are selling to the households, they are selling again the goods and services which they expect to get income from. And there has to be some mechanism where these individuals and where these firms would be able to measure the extent of the value of what they are getting from the households and the value that they're getting from the firms. And therefore, that comes into play when you're talking about the monetary sector of the economy, which is a sector that deals with the measuring of the medium of exchanges that are used in order for individuals to exchange value for value. And in such a way, you'd find out that as those activities would be happening, we are now talking about prices. How much are you going to be offering whatever that you're offering to the market? Whether it's labor, how much are you going to be paid in form of remuneration for the labor that you're offering within the market? If it is a good that you want to buy from the firms, how much would be the pricing in relation to that particular good? So now we'll be talking about prices, and that's where you'll be talking about in microeconomics, we'll be looking at the individual price of a product. And in macroeconomics, now we're looking at the aggregated price level, which we refer to as the general price level of all the goods and services within an economy. So you'd find out that as these two interact, the firms and the households, they operate in such a way that the firms only provide those things that they deem to be profitable or to be having a return on investment which is positive, or which is within the expected range that they would be expecting. And in such a way, you'd find out that they will be neglecting the provision of certain goods and services within the market. As a result, you'd find out that certain sectors within the market would be under provided for, or undermined because of their non-lucrativity in terms of return on investment. So these sectors would be in relation to healthcare, the provision of affordable healthcare to the households, the provision of national security, which is the policing services, the defense forces of the nation, which cannot be provided by single individual firms, because they would be provided at a price which is beyond the affordability of the ordinary citizen within the economy. So you'd find out that the government intervenes in such an economy by providing these goods and services, as well as you look at infrastructure itself. The government intervenes within the economy to provide public infrastructure, which cannot be provided by the individual firms, because it's not regarded as profitable. So that's where the government intervenes to provide road infrastructures, the various infrastructures that we use, the public infrastructures that we use, etc., in order for the economy to function very well. So you cannot operate an economy without public roads. You cannot operate an economy without policing services, without property rights, without the legal system which the government provides. It also needs to have some form of revenue. And how does it get that revenue? You find out that it gets its revenue from taxing both the firms and the households. So taxes are the main revenue instruments of the government. So you'd find out that I've talked about the first unit that you're going to be looking at in your study guide, the second unit of the monetary sector, the third unit, which you refer to as the public sector, where we'll be looking at the general role of the government in the economy, and what qualifies and what justifies the existence of a government in the economy, etc., etc. So you'll find out all of these elements that we'll be looking at can be summarized from a secular flow of income and spending. All of the topics that we're going to be looking at, you can find them just by looking at this particular diagram that is on your screen, because it basically describes how an economy is functioning. So you find out that after all has been said and done, there is need for policymakers, or for those that are responsible for seeing the health of an economy, to be able to assess whether the economy is performing very well or not. So in such a way, you'd find out that we'll be looking at elements where the government would want to measure the extent to which the policies that they're enacting within the economy are successful or not. So the government would enact policies either of increasing taxation, of increasing its spending within the economy, of providing certain goods or services within the market, providing healthcare, providing education at an affordable rate within the economy. And they would want to measure the extent to which all of these can be encompassed within the economy. So that's where we look at what we refer to as the macroeconomic objectives. Macroeconomic objectives. So I'm sure when you looked at your study guide or one of the textbooks that you're using, you have encountered this term macroeconomic objectives. So a macroeconomic objective simply refers to standards that are used to measure the performance of an economy, or the objectives that policymakers would want to look at if they want to see the health of an economy. So basically, there are 5 macroeconomic objectives, which I want to summarize here. Just allow me to come to where I want. Okay, let me just come here. So there are 5 macroeconomic objectives. The first one is referred to as economic growth. The second one is referred to as full employment. The third one is referred to as price stability. The third one is referred to as external stability. Allow me to put that on the screen as well. So external, I hope I'm using the correct spelling. External stability, or the balance of payments stability. External stability, sometimes referred to as the BOP stability. Then lastly is equitable distribution of income and wealth. All right, so these objectives are very, very important for you to know them by name and for you to be able to explain them as well, which we're going to get into in a short while. So equitable distribution of income and wealth. So I've seen many questions popping up either from the assignment perspective, from the exam perspective, where they would want you to list the 5 macroeconomic objectives of an economy. So for those that will be advancing beyond this particular module, you are going to be meeting these objectives more often than not. In this module, you're going to be meeting them. In the next modules, you're going to be meeting them. So you're supposed to know what are the 5 macroeconomic objectives that an economy can be measured with. So if you want to assess any economy under the sun, you look at these 5 basic metrics: economic growth, full employment, price stability, external stability, and equitable distribution of income and wealth. So these are basically the measures that you'd use in order for you to come to a conclusion of whether an economy is performing very well or whether an economy is underperforming, or if you would want to assess the extent to which a certain policy is working effectively within the economy, you have to look at these various objectives within the economy. So we're going to start by explaining the first one, which is referred to as economic growth. So economic growth, I believe, it's a term that you've heard either in the news more often than not, in the publications, newspapers, etc., talking about either the economy is growing or the economy is shrinking, etc., and things like that. So economic growth is very, very important because obviously we're talking about the growing of an economy. So if an economy is growing, it is deemed to be positive in terms of its benefits to the economy. And if an economy is not growing, then that becomes a problem, because an economy would not be performing in the manner that it is required to be performing. So in terms of economic growth, we understand that we have to be able to define what economic growth is. Just allow me to get to where economic growth explanations might be. All right. So they are starting here. So by definition, economic growth simply refers to the increase in real GDP over and above the previous year's GDP. So basically, we are comparing the production that was happening over the years for us to be able to see whether the economy was growing, or the economic activity that was happening over the years for us to be able to ascertain whether the economy was growing. So economic activity can be measured using a metric that we refer to as gross domestic product, GDP. I'm sure you've heard about the term GDP when the Reserve Bank is presenting their monetary policy statements, or when the finance minister is presenting their fiscal policy statements or their budgets. They talk about the terms GDP, gross domestic product. So gross domestic product refers to the total value of all the final goods or services that are produced within the boundaries of a country within a particular time period. So you'd find that as production is happening, as we're looking at the circular flow of income, as firms will be producing, we are aggregating the production that the firms are producing. So we're looking at various industries, the agricultural industry, the tourism industry, the banking industry, all of these industries aggregated into a single sum. So we look at the total value of the production that has happened, either of the goods or of the service, or both of the goods or services, in order for us to get what we refer to as gross domestic product. So with gross domestic product, what is important for you to understand about it is mainly, first of all, its definition, what gross domestic product is, and how it is measured. How do we measure gross domestic product? So with gross domestic product, I'll come back to what we are broadly looking at, which is economic growth, how we finally then use the gross domestic product to measure economic growth. For now, we just want to understand this metric, which is gross domestic product, how it is measured, and how we can come to a conclusion regarding gross domestic product. So when it comes to gross domestic product, there are three methods of calculating gross domestic product. The first one is the production method, sometimes referred to as the value added method. The second one is the expenditure method. We're going to be looking at them one by one and explaining them. The third one is what is referred to as the income method. So I would want to reverse a little bit to the circular flow of income and spending, so that you understand where these are coming from, where the production is coming from, where the expenditure is coming from, where the income is coming from. So if we are saying that we are using three methods to calculate, it means that at the end of the day, they're supposed to give us a single uniform figure, or a single uniform amount, because we are measuring the same thing, which is gross domestic product. So either you're going to be measuring gross domestic product from the production method, or from the expenditure method, or from the income method. You'd find out that you are supposed to be getting the same figure, because we're simply measuring it from different perspective. So allow me to go back a bit to the circular flow of income and spending, and to various diagrams that enables us to look at these things in a greater spectrum. All right, so we were looking at the circular flow of income and spending, which is this one, with participants and with various markets that gets then formed. And we talked about the fact that households are the owners of the factors of production. They own the natural resources, they own the labor, they own the capital, they own the entrepreneurship skills, they own the natural resources. So as they are offering these elements to the firms, they are paid, or they are remunerated. So they are remunerated in what is known as income. So the income would be in form of wages, the wages that they get when they offer their services to the households. Obviously, when you offer your labor, when you get to the labor market and you offer your labor skills, or your skills that you have, when you trade your time for remuneration that you get, you are remunerated in form of wages and salaries. So that is an income that you're getting. And if you are to offer your capital in the financial markets, obviously you are remunerated in form of interest, or any income bearing interest form. Then if you are to offer your natural resources, mainly land, you'd find out that If you are to offer your land, you are remunerated in form of rent. You get rent from that. And if you are to offer your enterprising skills, either to start a firm or whatever it might be, you are remunerated in form of profits. So you would find out that the income is representing the income method that we use to measure gross domestic product, because we are looking at the incomes that the households are receiving within this particular economy, and hence we can use that to measure the extent of economic activity, how much people are receiving in form of salaries, how much people are receiving in form of rent, how much they are receiving in form of profits, how much they're receiving in form of interest, and you can see whether the economy is performing very well or the economy is not performing very well if you were to measure that over time. Then you can see again that when the firms offer the goods and services in the goods market, these goods and services are then bought by the households, and the households use this income that they've received to purchase the goods and services within these markets. So obviously the assumption would be that they are using all their income to purchase the goods and services available within the market, and hence as a result you'd find out that we'll be using what we refer to as the expenditure method, how much the households are expending or are spending within the economy, and you can use that to measure the level of economic activity. And when it comes to the production method, these firms are producing. How much value are they producing within the economy? So the value that they are producing within the economy can also be used to measure the level of economic activity, because eventually the value is also reflected in terms of the income that the households are receiving, and it's also reflected in terms of how much the households are going to be spending on the production that is to take place or that has taken place within an economy, and therefore you'd find out that it would create an economic system. So eventually we're simply saying that production would equate to income, and income would equate to spending, and spending would equate to production. And you can see again on this particular diagram here, where you can see that the production of natural resources uses the natural resources, the factors of production, the labor, the capital, the entrepreneurship, and in turn the households are remunerated in form of rent, wages and salaries, interest and profits. This is the income method of measuring GDP. And the expenditure method, now the production that is then produced by the firms, the households would spend on it, and we'll be looking at the aggregated spending by the households in order for us to come to the total spending within the economy. So you'd see that the total spending within the economy would be measured in terms of the sum of the households, the firms, the government spending, as well as the foreign sector spending, which is the net foreign spending within the economy. So basically this sums up all the three methods that we use to measure gross domestic product. So let me just go down them. Let's try to get back to our, all right. So basically these are the methods that we are talking about. So the first one is the production method, or the value added method, where you simply add the value that is being added in terms of value addition by all the economic participants. Then the expenditure method, we try to look at gross domestic product, which we refer to as GDP, as the sum of consumption spending by households, abbreviated C, investment spending by firms, government spending, as well as the net foreign factor from abroad, which is X minus M, X representing exports, M representing imports. So all of these elements will be adding up to gross domestic product. And in terms of the income method gross domestic product would be measured as the sum of wages and salaries the households are getting, plus the rent the households are getting in terms of offering their factors of their natural resources to the firms, plus the interest that they're getting in terms of foregoing their capital, as well as the profits that they get if they are to enterprise and to become entrepreneurs in the economy. So these three methods help us to calculate what we refer to as gross domestic product. So you'd see that as we get deeper into this module, we're going to be looking at deeper these elements at a much more deeper perspective, because these are the elements that can be used to stimulate the economy, especially when we're talking about the intervention of the government into the economy, etc., etc., etc. So all of these elements are very, very important when it comes to the economy. So this is basically how gross domestic product is measured. Then finally, we use that gross domestic product to measure economic growth, or to compare the gross domestic product with previous year's gross domestic product, in order for us to come to a conclusion of whether the economy is growing or whether the economy is not growing. So you can see on your screen there that there is a particular graph that is highlighting the performance of the three economies, with Cuba, with Nigeria, with South Africa, over an array of a number of years, which in this aspect is from 1960 to somewhere to 2019, where you can see from a graphical perspective that there was growth in some countries, and some countries it was declining at some point, growing, declining, growing, declining, but overall you can see a growth trend on the economy. So for us, what is important for now is how do we measure economic growth? So for us to measure economic growth, we use the same definitive formula, where we can say that economic growth would equate to, we say that the difference between current year's GDP, or the previous year's GDP, minus the previous GDP, divided by, so we're dividing this difference, the sum difference of these two. I'm calling it the sum difference of these two divided by the previous year's GDP. So suppose that you are given value of gross domestic product that has already been calculated. Say that they tell you that in 2022, gross domestic product amounted to, say, 350. Okay, let's say 450 billion, 250 billion rand. And they tell you that in 2021, gross domestic product amounted to 350 rand. How do you measure gross domestic? How do you measure economic growth from such a scenario? So it simply means that you use 450, which is the current year's GDP, 450 minus previous year's GDP, 350, divided by 350, which is the previous year's gross domestic product. Then you multiply that by 100 to express it in terms of percentages. So if you have a calculator, I'm sure we are able to calculate those elements. Let me just calculate them to see what is the percentage growth. So 350 minus 450, that's 100. So that 100 divided by 350, then you multiply that by 100, you get growth of 28.57% in percentage terms. All right, so that is how you measure gross domestic product, and that is how you measure economic growth. Right, so this is how we measure economic growth, and this is what we'll be talking about when we're talking about the spectrum of economic growth. So with the other elements in terms of the macroeconomic objectives, so we talked about 5 of them. So we've talked about the first one, which is economic growth. The second one is referred to as price stability, or we can look at full employment. Full employment basically measures the extent of utilization of resources within the economy, the extent we are utilizing, to what extent are we utilizing the labor, to what extent are we utilizing the natural resources, to what extent are we utilizing the capital and the enterprising skills within the economy. So you'd find out that with full employment for this particular module, we are mostly interested in the utilization of the labor resources, because the labor resources are the main elements that influences the consumption activities of households. If people do not have any incomes, they are not going to be in any way spending within the economy. So basically, it's going to be affecting the spending within the economy. It's also going to be affecting the standards of living within that economy, because as people do not have any incomes, it means that we're going to be having a deterioration of standards of living, and things like crime, failure to access healthcare services, etc., will begin to emanate, and you'd find out that it will gravitate towards problem after problem within that same particular economy, and you'd find out that it will also affect other economic objectives as well. So you'd find out that you'll be looking at unemployment rate. What is unemployment rate? What is the unemployment rate within the economy? How do we measure the unemployment within the economy? You'd find out that again, in that same spectrum, we're going to be looking at a topic on its own relating to unemployment. So we'll be looking at unemployment. What is unemployment? The extent to which unemployment can be measured, different types of unemployment within the economy. We're going to be looking at that one. We'll be looking at unemployment, and with price stability. Price stability basically looks at the stability of prices. So basically, when I'm saying that price stability, we are looking at how or whether the prices are stable within the economy. So we understand that you cannot have a single system where the prices do not change, but basically we're looking at the overall price level, which we refer to as the general price level. So we would want to look at the stability of what we refer to as the general price level, and what we use to measure the general price level, which is the CPI, which we refer to as the Consumer Price Index, or the Gross Domestic Deflator, GDP deflator, in order for us to measure the stability of the prices. We're going to be looking at that when we'll be looking at the topic of inflation on its own. We find out that you're going to be looking at inflation on its own, and basically we'll be looking at price stability as well within that same spectrum. Then we have external stability. External stability, basically we're looking at the trade that is taking place of the local economy with the external economy. We understand that no economy can exist in isolation. South Africa needs to consume goods and services that are coming from other countries, from China. You're using Apple iPhones from the United States. You're using Android phones from China. You're using different elements in your homes that are coming from other countries. So you find out that in as much as an economy can be independent in terms of its production, but it also needs to have access to what is being produced to other countries. And as well as also for it to grow, it also needs to sell what it produces to other countries. So basically we're looking at the balance of exports and imports, the flow of foreign direct investments into and out of the country, which are deemed to be beneficiating the economy in one way or the other. Then lastly, we have what we refer to as equitable distribution of income and wealth. So with equitable distribution of income and wealth, we find out that we'll be trying to look at the extent of the inclusion of the economic growth within a nation. So if you're having growth, if you're having gross domestic product within the economy, to what extent are we having that getting to the average households within the economy? Because we say that we can measure gross domestic product using the income method or the spending method. Would want to ascertain or to assess the nature of this spending within the economy, the nature of these incomes within the economy. Is it everyone that is spending in as much as we are looking at the gross domestic product within the economy? Is everyone able to spend in the same way as every individual? So you find out that when you be looking at that, we'll be looking at the extent to which income is distributed across different group tiers, referred to as the Lorentz curve or the Gini coefficients, to come to a conclusion of measuring the extent of the distribution of resources within an economy. So in that one in particular, you'd find out that South Africa is regarded to be the most unequal country in the world when we are to measure the equitable distribution of income and wealth across the globe. If you are to measure the ones from Albania, America, Z to Zimbabwe, the worst that you would find in terms of the distribution of resources is South Africa with a Gini coefficient of around 0.69. We are going to be looking at that one when we look at equitable distribution of income and wealth as a topic, and how we are going to be measuring those elements in relation to the economy. All right, so I think for today, we've talked about it in a greater scale. I don't know if you have any questions before we can close. Any questions? So we're talking about measuring the performance of the economy. All right, so that means there are no questions. Thank you very much for attending today's lesson. So in the next session, we're going to be moving on into, I think we'll be looking at either price stability, inflation, or whatever. We'll try to follow the chronological format of the study guide in terms of the presentation of the various elements. So we're going to get deeper, especially on the subject of gross domestic product, the other metrics that are used to measure gross domestic product, as well as try to incorporate other elements within that. So you'll be having a copy of these notes that I'll be using. I'll try to aggregate the notes so that you'll be able to look at what we were looking at in each session. All right, thank you for attending today's session. Thank you very much. Until we meet again, goodbye.